welcome. This is the HTCC Supplemental Round information session. We've got a number of CHFA staff here with us today. Most of them will be presenting. We have Deb Alter, who is our Senior Program Officer for the Program Administration team. We have Stephen and Trayvon, who are integral members of our HTCC application review and quarterly report team. Ryan, who is new to our team. You may start to see emails from Ryan. Welcome to Ryan. He's a new employee working with the HTCC program. And then we also have our architect and construction services team led by Jennifer Landau, and we have Leslie Malaga here. We have a full agenda. This is modeled off of the information session that we do each year. Obviously, this is a little bit different. We're doing a supplemental round to deploy some additional resources. So we'll be covering the specifics of the supplemental round. But beyond that, pretty much the same guidelines, application process from the 2025 round will apply for the supplemental round. So we'll get into details for that. We'll provide a program overview, and we'll discuss the program updates from 2025. We'll have our ACS staff discuss any updates and application reminders from the technical services perspective. We'll discuss application rating and ranking in that process, as well as the process and timeline for the supplemental round. We'll also discuss how to maintain compliance with HTCC once you've received an award. We'll provide an overview of how you submit your application through Sharepoint and using the consolidated application. We'll go over some application tips. We have some resources and links for you, and we'll have some time for question and answers as well. Deb is going to be monitoring the chat as well, so you're welcome to put questions in the chat, and we'll also pause for questions periodically. So again, this is for a supplemental round. I don't know if we've done this for HTCC before, and if we have, it hasn't been in the recent history of the program. We do have approximately 1.3 million available to deploy as part of this NOFA. Like I mentioned, the 2025 guidelines will apply to this round. So that includes eligible applicants, limits on funding, application requirements, as well as point categories. However, the fundamental difference here is how we prioritize the applications, and we'll go through those priorities. We're also encouraging folks, you're welcome to schedule a brief pre-application meeting. Again, I know this is a little bit different. If you have questions about how your application fits into the priorities or any other questions, you're more than welcome to set up a pre-application meeting, and you can do that by emailing me. And we ask that you do that by November 5th. The other thing I wanted to note as part of this round is that the opportunity map, which is one of the points item, this was recently removed from our website. So you'll need to contact me and provide the addresses, and I can get you that information. But just wanted to make sure that folks are aware, don't get frustrated when they get to that point. That link is actually not attached to our website anymore. So you'll have to contact us for that. All right, jumping in. So like I said, we will be using a priority group for the supplemental round. So we'll be assigning applications to the highest applicable priority group, and we'll be reviewing each priority group until all the funds are awarded. So the very first priority group are those who qualify for the remaining balance of our set-asides. So that would be our permanent supportive housing set-aside or our workforce housing set-asides. And we will get into the specifics of how you qualify under those set-asides. The second priority group is for nonprofit corporations that have not received an HTCC award before or have not received it in 10 or more years. And this must be for a non-LIHTC project. Next is projects with 12 units or less. Supportive housing, that is a non-LIHTC project, SSHP properties, and then sixth, LIHTC projects affected by prevailing wage increases, and finally, home ownership. So real briefly, the way that the priority groups will work, we'll start off with the top priority group. If there's not enough funds to fund all the applications that qualify under that group, we will turn to the rating and ranking and score the applications. So there may be a chance we won't have to do points and rating and ranking based on the priority groups, but you'll still want to make sure that you've submitted all the application materials so that we can score you, and just put your best foot forward for the points if we're going to need to go to that within priority groups. So that's how the groupings will work for the supplemental round. I'll pause for a second and see if there's any questions on that, because that is, like I said, this is something new with the supplemental round. Any questions before we move forward?
Colette, this is Helen Muniz from JDA.
Hey, Helen.
How are you?
Good.
Thank you for this information session. But in terms of your first priority group, projects that qualify for remaining balance, was there a portion of those set-asides that was awarded for permanent supportive and workforce housing? Because I'm just wondering, if I'm down at number 5, should I even be applying if the set-aside is 1.3 for permanent supportive that hasn't been awarded?
So basically, again, it kind of falls under how many applications fall under that grouping. So you are correct. If we get 3 applications that all meet that criteria, we're not going to go any further, assuming that they exhaust the 1.3 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. And we could come back to this. Again, I realize that this is probably, and again, that's why I think a pre-application meeting is also helpful if you guys have questions about where you fall within the priority group. The other thing that I would say is, like, we just never know how many applications we're going to receive and under which priority group. So just keep that in mind as well when you're thinking about whether or not you're interested in applying.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right, Trayvon, I'm going to turn it over to you for the program review.
All right. The State Housing Tax Credit Contribution Program. So CHAPA authorized to administer $10 million in tax credits, $1 million set aside for workforce housing, and $2 million set aside for supportive housing. And for this 2025 supplemental round, we have approximately $1.3 million available. Tax credits are purchased by an eligible business firm. Historically, Eversource has been purchasing all the tax credits. You must benefit low and moderate income households, $500,000 max per year per applicant, and no development may receive more than $1.5 million total over 3 consecutive years.
Hi, this is Raymond Hagan from Neighborhood Housing Services in New Haven. I guess my only question is, would this opportunity, the supplemental round, count toward the $1.5 million total over 3 years?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it also, we're considering this a 2025 award. So if any of you have already received a $500,000 reservation under 2025, then you're capped out for your nonprofit agency. Go ahead, Trayvon.
Eligible applicants. So we have nonprofit corporation or community development financial institution. You have to meet CHAPA eligibility requirement. You must be in compliance with HTCC, evidence of administrative capacity to carry out the project, and able to demonstrate that one of the purposes is the construction, rehabilitation, or ownership or operating of housing. Eligible uses. So workforce housing, serve households that meet CHAPA definition. We'll get more into workforce housing a little later, provide more of a definition. Workforce housing development project, supportive housing rental, applicant must be a qualified service provider, revolving loan funds, and general class. So workforce housing, affordable housing for low and moderate income persons or families that include income, wage, or salaried workers in the municipalities where they work. Additional restrictions included in the definition. Workforce housing development project means the construction or substantial rehabilitation of dwelling units for the rental housing where 10% of the units are affordable, 50% of the units are rented to the workforce housing population designated by the developer in consultation with the municipality where such project is located, and 40% of the units are rented at market rate.
Thanks. We have a few more slides later. This is kind of a tough one to explain, so we'll break this out even more in a little bit. Thank you, Trayvon.
Generally, eligible costs, generally hard and soft costs necessary for completion of the project. So acquisition, construction costs, A&E, environmental reports and remediation, financing fees, soft costs, reasonable developer fee and capitalized reserves, revolving loan funds, so down payment assistance, mortgage interest rate buydowns, reasonable and customary closing costs, rehabilitation costs, and revolving loan funds loaning to developers should work with the eligible cost parameters described in this section. And ineligible costs include staff salaries, operating and overhead, and commercial costs.
Okay. All right. Back to me for program updates. So there are provisions under our procedures that are applicable to this program. They were updated at the end of 2024. Our board of directors approves the procedures, and the updates now provide more of a high-level framework for the program, which enables us to provide more detailed guidance in the guidelines themselves. So this allows us to be a little bit more responsive to program changes as we get feedback from you all. But just wanted wanted to make you aware that the procedures did change at the end of 2024. So to go through some of the notable changes, the big change that isn't really applicable for the supplemental round, but we now have priorities within the general class. So priority A is awarded ahead of priority B. Priority A is non-LIHTC deals and priority B is LIHTC deals. This is where we kind of get into some of the hair splitting with workforce housing. We're going to do our best to explain this, but I would definitely recommend if you're thinking about a workforce housing project that you set up a pre-application meeting so we can kind of further describe this. So there's now kind of two definitions going for workforce housing. And the reason for that is this second definition, workforce housing development project, that's new in the statute. So we have two eligible activities here. So the first, workforce housing, this is what we qualify under the set aside. So the 1 million that's set aside out of our annual allocation. So the changes that were made to this in 2025, we no longer require a program of assistance. This was removed from the procedures. And workforce housing rental projects, if you're coming to us for a workforce housing rental project, you need to commit to 40% of the units serving eligible workforce housing households. The second definition, workforce housing development project, like I mentioned, this is a very specific new statutory eligible activity. This does not automatically qualify under the set aside. It could if you also meet that definition, but it is distinct. So the specifics of the statutory definition for workforce housing development is you've got a project with 10% affordable, 50% workforce housing, and 40% market. And as I mentioned, it doesn't immediately qualify for the set aside. Kind of diving into this a little bit more, workforce housing under the set aside for CHFA means affordable housing for low and moderate income persons or families that include income wage or salaried workers in the municipalities where they work. If this is something that you're looking at, you'll want to check out the additional restrictions that are part of the definition in the guidelines. But that's essentially the eligible households that qualify under that. Again, the workforce housing development project, this is that specific new eligible activity that doesn't automatically qualify for the set aside. And the big distinction here, you've got the 10% affordable, 50% workforce, 40% market rate. The distinction I also want to point out here is that the population for workforce housing is a little bit different. And that's designated by the developer in consultation with the municipality. So again, kind of nuanced, and I would just recommend that you contact me with a pre-app meeting if you're looking at either of these. Continuing on with some notable changes from 2025, each year we do review the guidelines and provide updates. We now have consolidated guidance on the eligible costs, so that's now in its own section. If you're applying for an additional award for the same project, you'll need to provide a justification for the additional funds. We've clarified what is acceptable for land contribution for sponsor equity. So we need an as-is appraisal no older than 12 months, or we can also accept a settlement statement showing how much the nonprofit paid for the property. Any applicant committing to a low-income service period, this is a points item, you'll be required to record a restriction on the property. So at the time of your application, if you're committing to this, you'll need to provide a template or an applicant certification that you'll be doing that prior to closeout. And again, if you're doing workforce housing, you need to include that restriction in the criteria. One of the other changes is that our old priority funding map that I think many of us are familiar with, that also is getting phased out. So that I don't think is accessible online anymore. So for 2025, we'll still be using similar criteria, but you won't have the map as support. You'll have to provide us documentation for each of these so we can score your application. Again, with each year, we do go through the application materials. So I'm just kind of pointing out some of the major changes. In 2025, we now have an item where you need to provide confirmation from your CHFA asset manager if you intend to apply. So if you're a CHFA or SSHP property, we're just looking, it's just a communication tool so they're aware that you're coming to us for funding. So you're just sending them an email, letting them know that you're applying. And it just gives an opportunity to have a dialogue about the property with your asset manager. With regards to 12.4 and the proposal narrative, again, I know it's hard to call out all the changes we make, but make sure you're looking at the descriptions in the CONAP so that you're providing a proposal narrative that asks us for all the things that we are requesting. So have that instruction up next to you when you're updating your proposal narrative. If you're doing that workforce housing development project, you need to describe to us how it's meeting that eligible activity. And then reminder, we do have a gap justification form, and this is required for deals that have DOH or CHFA financing commitments. So that's not applicable for LIHTC only deals. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our ACS team. Jennifer?
Great. Thanks, Colette. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So we'll go through the requirements. Again, this is the same as earlier this year, so there really isn't anything new for the supplemental round. So again, just kind of keep in mind the phase 1 environmental site assessment. It is required in certain situations, and we will go into that on a subsequent slide, but just kind of keep that in mind, as well as the phase 2 or phase 3, if that phase 1 is required given your scope. If that phase 1 dictates additional testing or recommends additional testing, then that phase 2 or 3 may also be required as applicable. If it's an existing property, hazardous material reports are required. For the SHPO letter, that would be required post-award. If you do have it, feel free to include it with the application, but that is a requirement post-award. And as well as building permits, if you do have those can be included in the application. Next slide. Regarding the qualified development team, so for the architect, they should be licensed in the state of Connecticut. If your scope of work requires that an architect is required, some of the scopes of work for the HTCC program are limited, where a licensed architect may not be required by that town or city. So please provide any explanations and evidence. If your town or city does not require an architect, that would be required as part of the application. And as with the architect, the same thing applies to the contractor's license. If the scope of work does not necessitate a major contractor, then we would also be looking for some statement from that jurisdiction discussing the specific scope of work and what would be required in terms of a contractor's license. In some cases, a home improvement contractor license is acceptable, or if you're simply doing, say, HVAC or electrical work, that Connecticut trade license would also be acceptable, again, all depending on that scope. If the building code for a smaller 1 or 2 family dwelling does not require the services of a licensed architect, then we would allow that to be performed by a contractor, but again, provide that evidence and explanation with the application. Relating to SHPO, they do prefer to review the projects that they know have been awarded funding. So if you have been awarded an HTCC, then you can reach out to SHPO and provide that information post-award. And as I mentioned, if you already have a SHPO determination, please include that with your application. And then as also part of the application, you will be required to certify that any conditions or other requirements from SHPO that must be addressed as part of your scope of work. Please be aware to understand and investigate whether your project is located in a flood zone. So understanding that early on is helpful to know whether it's in a 100 or a 500-year floodplain, because that may affect eligibility. New development activities that are located in those floodplains are not eligible. So as I mentioned earlier, regarding the phase 1 or phase 2 or 3, the phase 1 would be required if your scope of work includes new construction, if you're including any additions or bump outs to existing buildings that are part of your scope, or if there's going to be any new utility work or site work on the project, which would require excavation or other soils on site being disturbed. So, and this would include the single family developments as well. Regarding the phase 1, you may request an exemption if you're able to provide evidence that the project site is raw land, it does not have any hazardous impacts. And if you have an older phase 1 report for the site, that can be provided as long as you can attest that you've retained ownership and that the site does not contain any issues or potential contamination such as underground storage tanks, and that it has not been used for illegal dumping or any other uses that may lead to soil or water contamination. Phase 1 would not be required if your scope of work is strictly an in-place rehab, no site work. There wouldn't be any kind of work outside the building such as new parking or sidewalks, but the hazardous material survey would be required for any rehab of existing buildings that are to be renovated or demoed, especially relating to asbestos, lead-based paint, lead in water, lead in soil, PCBs, radon, and a visual mold. But also keep in mind the age of the property that you might be proposing the rehab work. If it's a newer property built after, say, 1990, we would just need some kind of statement from your LEP saying that lead-based paint, PCBs would not be at play. If it is an older building built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or even early 80s, then most of this will be required as well. And again, this is just a reminder: asbestos, lead-based paint, lead in water, lead in soil, PCBs, radon, and a visual mold survey. For HTCC, the project cost summary and exploded trade payment breakdowns are not required, but just keep in mind that some data input may be necessary in order to populate the development budget tab in the CONAP. So just kind of keep that in mind. For the Exhibit 12.6, environmental certification, you will be required to provide a brief summary of the environmental concerns given the proposed scope of work. You need to describe the actions that will be taken to satisfy the state and local environmental requirements, and also certify that those recommendations made by the LEP will be addressed as part of that scope of work. And I'll pause there to answer any questions that anyone might have. And we're also always available, if you want to talk about the specifics of your project, feel free to reach out to Colette and myself, and we can certainly have a one-on-one if you have any project-specific questions.
All right, back to you, Trayvon.
So I'll be going over the points. So the application rating, the categories are project feasibility and readiness to proceed, affordability, applicant capacity / goals accomplished, livability initiatives, and compliance. So there's going to be 2 points worksheets, one for revolving loan funds and one for housing developments. Existing services replaces the priority funding area. So you must upload support documentation for existing water and sewer service, a half-mile buffer, mass transit, and a half-mile walking distance for a 7-day local bus. Low-income service period points, Exhibit 14.6, must certify that units will be restricted as proposed in the application for the time period applicant is committing to, must be submitted with closeout materials. And this was updated and new for the 2025 neighborhood revitalization points. So infill developments, 3 points, blighted, abandoned, condemned, or underutilized sites, 2 points, and for revolving loan fund points, commit to loaning to at least one property that meets this criteria. So an infill lot is defined as a parcel of vacant land located in an urban setting and an established neighborhood with access to existing public utilities and amenities. Development of housing on a blighted, abandoned, condemned, or underutilized site, for example, a vacant school. The points will be provided if the applicant provides a letter from a town or city official attesting that the property meets this criteria.
Great. Thank you, Trayvon. All right, Stephen Norris, you're up next.
Good afternoon. Today I'll be talking about the application, HTCC process and timeline. The first step is a Sharepoint site request. Please, that is required to be requested by Monday, November 17th, 2025. And then the application due date, the application must be submitted by Wednesday, November 19th, 2025, no later than 4 p.m. Going into the application process, you must use version 2025 CONAP, which has to be submitted by the due date to be considered, which is 4 p.m. November 19, 2025. Applications that do not meet threshold requirements will not be considered, so please review the exhibit checklist in the CONAP. The applications will be reviewed based on priority groups that were mentioned earlier in the slides until the funds are exhausted. Then approved applicants will have 60 days to provide executed business firm commitments. The business firm makes the HTCC payment or contribution to the award recipient for its housing program. The award recipient provides evidence in the form of a notarized statement with a copy of the check and evidence that the funds are in a segregated account. Then lastly, CHAFA issues a tax credit voucher to the business firm. Going into the 2025 supplemental round estimated calendar. As mentioned before, November Sharepoint site request should be received by November 17th, 2025. I will be going into Sharepoint a little bit later in the slides. Applications are also due to Sharepoint on November 19th by 4 p.m. Then in January or February, the announcement will be posted on CHAFA's website of eligible housing programs to which business firms contribute. And then lastly, March or April, contributing business firm applications are due to CHAFA.
Thanks, Stephen. So again, we're kind of covering nuts and bolts for HTCC, so we're skipping ahead to how to maintain compliance in the event you receive a reservation and award of tax credits. So we've kind of outlined some of the critical components of maintaining compliance. So make sure you're obtaining necessary project approvals, so zoning, building permits. We do collect building permits as part of the application or quarterly report process. Maintain a segregated bank account and accurate accounting records for for the HTCC funds. Be sure to market the housing program. Make sure that the public's aware that rental units are coming online or there's home ownership opportunities available. Make sure you meet the required housing program timeframes. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's essentially 3 years to complete your project. Submit timely, accurate, and complete quarterly and closeout reports. This is critical as there are points penalties for future rounds for repeat offenders for submitting reports late. Seek approval for changes and modifications to the budget or the project or the housing program. So again, we shouldn't find out about any major changes at closeout. That's something that you need to be in communication with us so that we can acknowledge or approve any changes. Participation in monitoring activities, and again, avoid penalties and non-compliance designations. So with regards to the segregated account, this is for an account for HTCC funds only, and the funds should be approved for HTCC expenditures only. So this is what comes to us with the quarterly report. So we'll be looking at bank statements, making sure that the HTCC funds are the only funds in the account, and then we'll be reviewing invoices to make sure they're being expended on approved budget line items. Again, be sure to reach out to us if there's any changes to the program or to the HTCC budget so that we can approve that. Follow your project timeline. So track your closeout date. So we now put those date on your reservation letter. So you should be monitoring as you're approaching that date. Make sure you're getting your closeout done. Report delays with your project on the quarterly report. Again, communication is key, so we kind of have an idea of what's going on with your project, and reach out to us if you're experiencing any significant delays. As far as participating in monitoring activity, that usually takes the form of site visits. Occasionally we may ask for additional materials, but mostly anything additional happens at a site visit. All right, so for quarterly report, like I mentioned, this is kind of an important one to make sure you're submitting them on time. There are penalties associated with late reports. You do submit them through this link, this HTCC Dropbox. Make sure you're using the most recent version of the report. Be sure to include all the required attachments, and those are listed on the report, so just make sure you're following that form when you're uploading any attachments. Update the form each quarter, including percentage complete and narrative sections. We do notice that folks will do a save as from the prior quarter, and they don't always update materials. So please review your reports before you submit them. Make sure you've updated fields so it makes sense and we can follow the progress of your project. Again, follow your approved HTCC budget and reach out if you need to make any modifications. Same goes for any changes to the project itself. Kind of talked about closeout dates. So the closeout date is on your reservation letter, 3 years from the reservation letter for housing development. For revolving loan funds, it's slightly different. That 3 years starts when you get the funds from the business firm. Contact us early regarding project delays. Submit your closeout materials by the deadline. Review the closeout checklist so that you're obtaining any of the deliverables that need to come in with that. We do, for those of you who come to HTCC regularly, you know that when we do a closeout, we do go back and review your application and make sure that you have accomplished the things that you committed to in your application. So any AMI designations or affordability periods, we verify all of that. With regards to the closeout deadline, so it's 3 years, but you actually have 3 years and 90 days to get the materials to us. So the reason that I'm kind of highlighting this specifically, because it is a little bit of a sticking point with the program, and we really try to work hard to keep everyone in compliance, but we need you guys to be a partner with us in that. So our procedures, which again is approved by our board, so that's not something that we can waive, says that if you don't meet your closeout deadline, you're not eligible to apply for 2 years. So again, this is kind of a serious thing. We are highlighting for you guys so that you are tracking this, paying attention, and reaching out if you're foreseeing any issues with being able to accomplish this. So we do provide, or we will review extension requests. Again, we want to work with you as a partner. If there are valid delays for your project and you need an extension, that's something that you should be discussing with us. We will consider these extensions, but we want you to reach out to us as early as possible as you're learning that your project's not going to make it within the required time frame. Please don't wait till the end. The way that we're reviewing extension requests going forward is that you may be granted an extension, but you may be considered out of compliance until the time that you complete your extension. So we're going to be evaluating each of these requests again. So it's important that you're paying attention to this. All right. Stephen, back to you for SharePoint and ConApp updates or overview.
Thanks, Colette. So going to SharePoint, what is SharePoint? SharePoint is used to submit a consolidated application to both CHAFA and DOH. It's a Microsoft-based product that will create a website for each application, enabling users to access, manage, and share application information. As you can see below is a screenshot of what the homepage will look like. And to the left is the home task list. So we'll be going into those in the subsequent slides. In terms of sharing the site, SharePoint allows collaboration, which means multiple team users can work to the application simultaneously. It allows multiple users to assign and complete tasks, update a single consolidated application workbook, and upload files as necessary. And the way to request a SharePoint site is that applicant should send an email to applicationrequest@chafa.org, and you should provide the funding round. So in this case, it would be the HTCC 2025 Supplemental, the application name, company name, your primary contact name, email, and phone number, and also any email addresses of additional users who need access as well. And then also for further information instructions for the request, you can look up the general SharePoint web app instructions, which is located on our website. And how to get access to SharePoint. Each application request will require a separate email request, so do not combine multiple requests with a single email. An example is if you have a hybrid financing structure that's proposed, one email would be requested for SharePoint for the 9% portion, and then another email would be requested for a SharePoint for the 4% portion. So it'd be two emails. Allow 2 to 3 business days for the website to be created. When the site is ready, you will receive an email with access to the application-specific website. A Microsoft account will have to be created for each email address used in SharePoint. Again, you can refer to the general SharePoint web app instructions on our website for more information. Then lastly, Microsoft has implemented enhanced secured measures that restrict group members from sharing the site with external users. So as I mentioned earlier, to request additional users to have access, you'll just have an email request containing user information, and that must be sent to applicationrequest@chafa.org. Now, in terms of using SharePoint, in the portal, you will find a description of the funding round and a quick access button on the left side. On the left side, the top is the task list, which shows a list of tasks associated with the application. Tasks can be assigned to specific team members and be given due dates. Provides a timeline of activity prior to application submission date. And one important thing to note is once all items are checked off, the application website will be locked and your application will be submitted, so no further changes can be made once the application is submitted. The next item is a consolidated application workbook, which can be found in SharePoint for download to your PC. Also on the CHAFA and DOH websites, it can be found there as well. It must be downloaded from either source, filled out, and then uploaded to SharePoint when complete, and that has to be prior to the submission deadline. And again, you must use the current version, 2025, of the ConApp. Prior versions will not be accepted. For file uploads, a section of website specifically for file uploads where you can upload multiple files at once and place them into section folders. So there's a drag and drop available for convenience. Uploaded items can also be removed if done incorrectly and can also be replaced. Please keep the file name short and relevant. Do not repeat project names in the file path. Avoid unnecessary spaces or hyphens, and also abbreviate consolidated application as ConApp, please. For the section folders are aligned with sections in consolidated application, so you can upload those files to the relevant section folders. There's also, to the left, the reference library. This section includes several templates of forms that are to be completed and submitted with each application as applicable to your project. And then lastly is the help section. There's a help section available to walk users through the steps to use each section of the SharePoint website. It can be accessed through the menu in the upper left section of the home screen or by clicking help links in each section description. For submitting the application, it is recommended to upload documents as they are completed to avoid any potential submission errors due to attempts to upload to the site at the cutoff time. CHAFA will not review any uploads to the SharePoint site until after the application submission date and time. Nothing submitted via email will be considered as part of the application unless requested specifically by CHAFA or DOH. And to submit your application and lock your website, mark all the items in the task list section as complete. And then just for another friendly reminder, the due date is 4 p.m. November 19th, 2025 to submit the items.
All right. So again, a lot of repeat themes here, but before we send you on your way, some tips for getting started with preparing your application. Make sure you're using the 2025 version of the Khan app. Use that exhibit checklist in the Khan app. That's going to tell you what materials need to be submitted with your application. Read the application clearly to understand what's required. Like I mentioned earlier, the narratives of what's required for each upload sometimes change, so you want to make sure that you're looking at the descriptions and that you're submitting what we're asking for. Also part of the Khan app and the exhibit checklist, it's going to list items with a T on the checklist, and those are considered threshold requirements. So applications can be removed from consideration if those threshold items are missing. So you want to use that exhibit checklist as a tool to understand what you need to submit. Identify any long lead items that are needed and get clarification on what ACS items are required or not required. And like I said, that's another opportunity for a pre-application meeting if you want to discuss your specific project. Preparing exhibits, refer closely to the instructions. We kind of hit that already. Another reminder, when preparing evidence of financial commitments for your application, this is a points item. Be sure to refer to the HTCC guidelines for what documentation is acceptable. So I know that staff will have that guideline open when we're reviewing your application, so it is very handy to make sure that you're submitting the documentation that we need as part of our review. Again, don't wait till the last minute, especially to give yourself time to address any questions or issues with your submission. One of the last things is consider the readiness of your project to proceed and whether it's reasonable to be expected to be completed within the required time frame. We do have that 3-year, 90-day mark, so if you're not feeling that's achievable, we do have another round that will probably coming out in the springtime. So just keep those things in mind as far as whether your application is ready. And we are now kind of getting to the end here. We will get these slides out at some point to share with folks. We've got some links in here with resources, and I've got some final email contacts, and are happy to take any questions that folks have at this point. Okay, like I said, you've got our contact information. I see lots of familiar names, so you guys are welcome to reach out. I'm happy to set up a pre-application meeting, and you can also email your questions. Hope this was a helpful information session for you guys, and take care.